Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Peer Review Week 2025 celebration with Asian Council of Science Editors. I'm so happy and glad to see such active participation with all of you to our second panel discussion today. If yesterday we talk about publisher's perspective, today we will be looking at peer review from editor's chair, how AI is reshaping the editorial reviewer dynamics and the practical challenges it brings to day-to-day workflows and the responsibilities that editors carry in setting standards. We are lucky to have three brilliant editors with us today. We'll be bringing through both industry-wide and hand-on experience. And let me introduce them. First, we have Laura Dormer, Editor-in-Chief of Learned Publishing and co-founder of Becaris Publishing. She's also an advisor at Asian Council of Science Editors. With Laura, I think there is no need to introduction. She has been leading the conversation across the industry on new editorial practices, peer review, and she brings both broad industry lens and practical experience for running independent journals. Next is Alaina Webster, co-editor-in-chief of Editorial Office News and deputy managing editor at ASCPT. Alaina is right at the heart of editorial workflows. She knows very well the day-to-day pressures of peer review management, how it comes to editorial workflows, and how AI is starting to reshape them. And finally, we have Jonathan, editor-in-chief of Science Editor and senior editor of Journal Operations at the American Heart Association. Jonathan has deep experience in, I would say, policymaking and journal strategy at a big canvas as well. And he has been leading one of the questions of how editorial integrity and standards adopt in the very moment when we have AI in the picture. So to get us all started with today's panel discussion, I would like to ask all three of my co-panelists the same question to set some baseline for today's conversation. Generative AI is forcing the editorial boundaries, the editorial leaders to revisit the long-standing assumption that we have about peer review process and peer review. So from your perspective as an editor-in-chief, what is the single biggest change you believe that editorial policies must make in the next 2 to 3 years at least to stay credible and relevant? I want to start with Laura at first.
Thank you, Maryam, and thank you for that very kind introduction. It's great to be here with everybody to talk about this topic on Peer Review Week. I think, thinking about sort of the single biggest change with editorial policies, I think, there's always going to be a lot of things going on with editorial policies, but I think one of the things that I sort of noticed when kind of the big AI ChatGPT explosion kind of happened towards the end of sort of 2022 was that the need to sort of move quite quickly to introduce policies into something that really hadn't been covered previously within editorial guidelines about the appropriate use of AI, whether that be by authors or peer reviewers or editors ourselves. And I think we did fairly well to get things introduced into the policies. There was a lot of talk around whether or not AI could be an author, whether or not it can be used. But I think the difference between AI and some of the other sort of things that have happened in publishing over the years is that it's continually evolving. Day to day, week to week, there's new technologies available, there's new tools becoming available that are making use of these AI technologies. And whereas where we first started introducing into our policies that, specific rules, it can't be used for this and that, I think what we're having to move to more now is the need to be more agile and adaptable enough to be able to encompass any updates to the technology as they're emerging, but at the same time maintaining clarity about the need for all of us, but today's thinking specifically about peer reviewers, to remain accountable to keeping that sort of human involvement in the process to make sure that reviewers are accountable for the feedback they're giving to the editorial team upon which we're basing, some very important decisions. So I think it's that agility, but also that clarity that is something that will need to be something that's really focused on regarding policies over the next couple of years.
Perfect. How do you see it, Alaina?
Well, thanks, Miriam. And I'll echo Laura in saying it's really great to be here this morning for me, this afternoon for most of you. So thanks for having us. So I think that one of the things that we need to get past as publishers, as editors, um, we cannot make any blanket no AI policies. It's just not, it's not feasible. First of all, they're not enforceable. I mean, just, you know, right down, right down to it, they're not enforceable. You don't know what someone is doing, on their end. But they're also not practical. And I think, even as far back as like 6 months ago, there were publishers. Wiley, for example, for a little while had a no AI for peer reviewers policy. And then they very quickly walked that back, when people were saying, well, actually, it's not always a bad thing. One of the things I think that AI has the opportunity to do is really break down those language barriers that we often struggle with, particularly when it comes to accepting a paper, but also using certain reviewers. There may be reviewers that generally would say no because they might be asked to review for a journal where the journal the language is published in is not their second or even third. It might be, their fourth or fifth, and they maybe don't feel confident writing a review in that language, but now they don't have to. They can upload their review into AI and it can give them back, for example, an English language summary, a Spanish language summary. So I think these things are very, very important. But again, there is that dichotomy with, you know, copyright and intellectual property and things like that. So it needs to be clear that you cannot upload someone's unpublished work to AI. But again, it's difficult because it's not enforceable. So, but I think that we need to embrace AI and figure out how to make it work. It's not an if, it's happening. It's a now.
Thank you, Alaina, for such a brief point of view from your side. Moving to Jonathan, how would you see this picture?
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks for having me again here today. Kind of building on these 2 points, I think the the key here will be transparency and in the policies, and also the editors and journals need to really kind of think about how we're going to adapt AI into our workflow, peer review workflow, so we can provide these tools to reviewers, so they're not just kind of thinking they're out on their own and like, should I be using this tool or should I be using these tools? Because they're hearing about all the same stuff that we are too. So I think that that's the key, is that we have to really kind of be open with with reviewers, what we're doing, and also make sure that it's really transparent. How they need to know how they can use it, what's acceptable, so that they do tell us when they're using it, and that they also know then what we're doing. Maybe, and ideally we're providing those tools to the reviewers themselves so they don't have to go out and find them.
That's very precise and covering the rest of the part that was being left by Laura and Alaina. So to move forward a little bit more focused for our first round of how we see things in more practical ones. So Laura, I want to start with you. Learned publishing often addresses emerging editorial practices when it comes to wider industry. So how do you see that the artificial intelligence is changing the editor to reviewer dynamic, and what lessons can editor borrow from early experiments?
Thanks, Maryam. And I guess for those that aren't familiar, Learned Publishing is a journal that's published by the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishers. So it's a publication targeted perhaps at smaller society publishers, but often people that are also partnering with the larger publishers as well. So the aim is to sort of to publish about publishing and some of the best practices and so forth. So that gives me a really nice insight into sort of emerging topics and what people are kind of thinking around these sort of tricky subject areas. I think thinking about the editor-reviewer dynamic, I mean, I think as Alaina has already said, the reviewers are going to be using AI. It's no good having a blanket policy that says don't use AI because one, they're going to anyway, and the reason they're going to is because it's genuinely useful in many ways. So I think the editor role will be involved in kind of providing that guidance on best practice, trying to ensure transparency. I know from very early on when we started to introduce policies around disclosure of AI use, authors but also peer reviewers were coming to me and sort of asking, I have done this. How do you want me to disclose it? What do I need to disclose? I've used it for, copy editing or language editing. Do I need to disclose that? Do I only need to disclose it if I've used it more extensively? There's lots of sort of nuance into what we're asking reviewers and authors to disclose. So I think I've kind of certainly learnt as we've gone along the different kind of use cases that people are starting to use these tools for, and how best to advise them when it comes to making their disclosures transparent, because I think genuine people want to be transparent about what they're doing. I think as well, I've been sort of seeing various experiments from different publishers in terms of how to help reviewers use these tools to their best advantage. And I know that some publishers are starting to experiment with providing AI assistance within their kind of peer review systems, sort of AI assistance to do summarization or perhaps to provide a sort of a chat function, that kind of thing. And, I think the feedback generally has been reasonably positive about that. And of course, it does keep it in that more secure environment in terms of the data privacy and so forth. But I think, right from the start and all along, the sort of the things that I'm seeing is that AI is definitely not a replacement for that human judgment and human context that the human reviewer can provide. So, introducing those policies early on about disclosure were important, but they need to continue to develop as sort of the use cases evolve and the different types of ways that the reviewers are making use of these tools to make sure that we're being transparent about that, but also helping other reviewers to know what the possibilities are and use these tools to really help them make it a more enjoyable or less arduous task to complete a peer review, while at the same time keeping their what they're good at, their expertise, and bringing that nuance and understanding of the papers that they're reviewing for us.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to continue the same discussion with a little bit of operational side with Alaina. As co-AIC of AON, which is closely tied, I think, to the editorial office management, what are the most presenting operational challenges that you see when introducing AI into our day-to-day peer review management?
Sure, that's a great question. So Editorial Office News, or EON, as we call it, really focuses on editorial staff who are in the office doing the day-to-day work of processing manuscripts, getting manuscripts from submission to acceptance, doing the production workflow, that sort of thing. So we're not quite usually at the publisher level. It's more in the everyday working person who's in the editorial office, making these decisions day to day. As far as AI goes, I think one of the frustrations at the editorial office level is just the uncertainty of it. I had a colleague who attended the peer review congress in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and on the same panel, back-to-back speakers said some like two totally different things concerning AI use in drafting manuscripts. One said, all of these AI detection tools, they don't really pick up anything. And the other got up and said, I completely disagree with that. I think they're actually very accurate. It was really helpful information for her, and I'm sure for everyone else. Um, what I'm saying is the policies just change so quickly, and often before changes can be fully implemented, which makes communicating best practices to authors and reviewers and editors very difficult. By the time you've come up with the language for your policy and run it through all the people that it needs to go through before you can implement that change, AI may have changed again, and your policy is no longer relevant, even though 2 weeks ago it was. Um, on a personal level, with my journals, we are also seeing a rise in submissions, particularly with letters to the editor, interestingly enough, which I think is because AI makes writing something like that so much quicker. You could ask AI to draft a letter to the editor by just plugging in the manuscript that's already been published, say, I would like to write a letter with this viewpoint, and AI will spit one back out for you. So now we've had to start triaging letters to the editor, which we didn't really have to do before, but we've had authors from the original papers push back saying, there's no relevance to this. It's not saying anything different. It's not important. And I think at a smaller editorial office or at a smaller publisher, this starts to get kind of overwhelming because even if you're desk rejecting for these, it's still one more paper that you have to look at. It's still more time that you're spending going through manuscripts rather than doing, the 18 other things that you do in a small office like that. So I think these are some of the pain points that we're seeing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alaina, to adding a real-time example from the recent Peer Review Week Congress as well. I really appreciate that AI is creating a chaos if not controlled properly. So moving over to Jonathan, as EIC of Science Editor by Council of Science Editors, you engage directly with conversations about editorial integrity. So how should editors lead the way in setting disclosure standard for AI use in peer review?
Yeah, thank you. I think disclosure is the key right now, especially. We've had some commentaries in Science Editor. So we like to encourage these discussions among editors where, it ranges from, if you don't disclose, there's confusion and not clear. And we published one recently where the researcher made an adamant case that not disclosing AI use was as tantamount to, any other kind of research misconduct. Because it indicates that you're not using that, you're not actually thinking about the research. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's an interesting thing, and it's good to put out there because I think that you need to be clear how you're using it and why you're using it, so that people don't make blanket judgments about, they used AI and it was, they didn't actually write anything. Well, maybe they did use AI, but they used it, just to clean up the language a little bit. That's a big difference. So disclosure at this point, I think, is going to be the main policy. And I think the way that editors can lead in the disclosure is to disclose how we're using it, how are journals actually using AI. That's not clear to a lot of authors and reviewers. There is a lot that AI can do, as we've discussed. There's a lot that AI can do to improve the peer review process. There's a lot of things that reviewers are checking and spending a lot of time checking that really don't that can be done pretty quickly by AI. An example I always think of is, checking references. Like there's some reviewers who'll go, reference by reference to make sure this relevant. Is it actually a working reference? The links work. And some reviewers don't even touch that stuff. And we don't always know that. And so if we tell them up front, well, we're employing an AI tool that will do all this checking for you. You don't have to worry about references, for example. That's great because it kind of helps the reviewers focus on what they can bring to the picture. And at the same time, if we don't do that, then I think reviewers are going to start doing that because they know these tools are out there. Stuff is making headlines, even out in the lay news, and they're gonna turn to these tools unregulated in a way that we can't. We don't know how they're using them possibly. And so if we're not providing these tools or giving them guidance on it, they're just going to go off and do whatever they want. So I think disclosure is really important, both from what the reviewers are doing, but also what the journals are doing, so we can kind of encourage them to kind of use it in a really appropriate way.
Really well. So I would say with these perspective from the three of you, I'm hearing that here is a blend of opportunities and caution when it comes to AI. And it's really, really changing the relationship and reshaping the whole editorial workflows that we have in picture in mind in the previous years. And it is definitely pushing us to set a clear disclosure expectations. So let's now explore a little bit of safeguards and long-term strategies. Again, starting with you, Laura, from your dual role in Becaris Publishing, what safeguards should smaller or independent publishers should consider when adopting artificial intelligence tools for peer review, given their limited resources?
Yeah, thank you, Maryam. This is a subject I've been thinking about quite a lot, as you say, both from my role at Becaris Publishing. We're just a small publisher; we just publish one journal, but also then with my editor-in-chief role at Learned Publishing. I think a lot of the experiments that you mentioned in the first question you asked me around some of the early experimentation of using AI, inevitably a lot of that is being done by sort of the larger publishers. They have more resources. They obviously have big portfolios. They will probably have sort of maybe teams of people that are looking around sort of research integrity issues and all these kind of things. That's not necessarily the case with a lot of the sort of the smaller society publishers, smaller independent publishers. They don't have those large teams necessarily. They don't necessarily have as many resources, although of course there's differences across all of these organizations. But I think with smaller publishers it's important to be realistic about what you're going to be able to introduce and to work with on your journals, and really consider sort of the costs and the benefits of some of the tools that started to become available. So last week I was at a publishers conference, and there was obviously a lot of exhibitors that were talking about new tools that are being developed, and a lot of them sound very exciting and interesting. But obviously each one has a cost, has not just a monetary cost, but the time involved in who's going to be responsible for that in the editorial office. Is it the editor themselves? Is there an editorial assistant that's going to need support and training in how to best to use that tool? So I think the key thing for me is to think about what are the specific kind of pain points, either from an editorial editor's point of view or from my peer reviewers' point of view, that we can make use of these tools to really help address some of those concerns that we're having. In order to do that, of course, the smaller publishers need to keep to date with what's going on, keep informed about any kind of emerging policies and issues around the use of these tools, and be guided by those larger bodies. So organisations like COPE and the Committee on Publication Ethics is really, really valuable for smaller publishers to make sure that we're keeping our policies in line and appropriate with the sort of the overall context of what's going on in the industry. But I think, again, just at the forefront of everything that we do, small, big publisher, whatever, is the safeguarding of that data privacy and security is so important. Once you've lost trust in that kind of process of peer review underpins so much of what we do in terms of the trust of the content that journals are publishing, and if that trust is lost, then it's very, very difficult to get that back. So making sure that safeguarding of data and data privacy and all those kind of thoughts are really at the forefront of any kind of actions and any tools that we adopt is really, really important to think about when you're thinking of adopting some sort of new process into your workflows, whatever it happens to be.
Perfect. Great points, Laura. I really agree that we need good policies in hand to make everyone responsible, and maybe some ways the organization can look for how the policies would come in action as well in implementation. That's only the way that we can ensure that what we create as policy is implemented and is giving some impact as also. So moving forward, I want to look one thing with Alaina from your perspective with ASCPT, where rigorous review models for translational sciences, these are like critical ones. So how can AI support quality control without compromising on the expert judgment of human experts provide on this side?
Thanks, Maryam. So I'd be surprised if it hasn't come up at some point during peer review week already. But we talk a lot about reviewer burnout. lately. It seems like everybody I talk to is struggling to find reviewers. They're struggling to have the reviews returned on time. I mean, it's, we for a little while thought it was just us. And then you go to these conferences, and of course, no, it's industry wide. Everyone is struggling, and everyone's running around, well, nobody wants to review anymore. And I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I think that there's just so much more content. Um, and editors I mean, ours are guilty of this too. They tend to go back to the same well over and over and over again. Um, this person is a reliable reviewer. I know this person. I'm going to ask them to review. Um, so there is burnout, and people have tried to reduce this in different ways. I recently heard about a couple of larger societies who tried giving reviewers 3 weeks to review instead of the normal kind of standard two. Um, and interestingly, it completely backfired, which is not what you would think it would do, but um, they actually had more trouble finding reviewers, and their on-time rate did not improve. If anything, it fell. I think because people thought, oh, I have 3 weeks, and then it completely fell off their radar. Um, so obviously more time is not the issue. But I think that, as Jonathan and Laura have both said, using AI to decrease the number of things that a reviewer has to look for, I think is really important. We can use AI to weed out papers that are not deserving of review, so that there are fewer papers actually going to our reviewers. Um, I mean, there's lots of AI that can help you look at submissions, whether it's does it meet journal standards, does it have similarity to paper mill papers, or does it seem to have been written mostly by AI? Um, I think if we go to reviewers with better science more frequently, they might be more willing to say yes because they're scientists. They get really excited about it. They want to see what's
Yeah.
coming up. They want to see what's next, but they don't necessarily want to slog through something and then be like, I don't know why this paper even got to me. It's really not worthy of review. Um, I also, as I said before, I think reducing the language barrier for peer reviewers will help as well, because you can get more people involved. Um, it's a great tool for cleaning up your review. You just really have to make sure that you don't upload the actual paper into an AI server or really any parts of it. And I've heard the argument that, oh, well, a lot of authors are putting their stuff on preprint servers right now. That's true. That's their choice. That's not your choice to put their paper on online. So I think it just really is important to make sure that we toe that line between what's hopeful and what is violating people's copyright and intellectual property rights.
Perfect, Alaina. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. And moving forward to Jonathan, let's bring the discussion with the AHA perspective. From your role at the American Heart Association journals, what editorial policies you see that are providing most effective, or I would say most needed in addressing potential risk of biases or over-reliance on AI-generated reviews?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, I'd say right now, excuse me, the key policy is that there always needs to be a human in the loop. We're not at that stage at AI where we can just, give the tool to somebody, they can use it, and then it just, this stuff's out there. Definitely needs to be reviewed by an editor, by the authors who have provided, whose work it's based on, or anything like that. So there needs to be somebody reviewing it right now. And that's really what we're focusing on currently, is that where can we put the human in the loop? And it's hard, even at a larger publisher or a society, it can be hard to find the people to do that and provide that support. So it's not, I'm not saying it's easy, but it definitely needs to be done at this time.
Mhm.
The other policies we have at our journals, we currently we do say they can't use AI right now, and that's for that reason that for peer reviewers at least, for the reason it's been talked about, is that the only way to do it really is to upload it to servers that could be public. theoretically, reviewers could use their closed garden institutional servers, but keeping track of all that is really hard to do, and we can't be guaranteed that they're going to use it with that. If we work with a contractor, for example, at the American Heart Association, that contractor has to submit a very long questionnaire explaining how they are using AI and like how the material is protected and all this kind of stuff. And we can't ask reviewers to look into that every time they're uploading their manuscripts. So really, unfortunately right now we just have to say you really can't do it unless we're using the tool, unless we provide those tools. Um, and I think, I mean, we could talk. I think an interesting way to think about it too is we might, yeah, reviewers maybe shouldn't be using AI. Like even for all those things, if ideally, if we can provide them for these materials, what would they need to use AI for? If we're sending a manuscript to review for a reviewer, we want their input, we want their feedback, we want their experiences, we want to hear from them as a person, not necessarily have them use the tools if possible. So I know that's different for a different organization. But I think we should really doing whatever we can to discourage the AI use by reviewers so we can get an actual review from them. And then I think finally, another policy that we've had to come up with, I guess not necessarily a policy, but it's a response, is undisclosed AI use by reviewers has basically been the author complaint du jour. We hear from authors these days, reviewer two has definitely used AI to craft this review. You should completely throw out all of their comments. I'm not even going to respond to them. And, as Alaina said, it's not always clear. You can't tell sometimes if the review has been written by AI, and you don't really want to go around accusing reviewers of using AI, especially when you can tell that English isn't their first language, for example, because it can be offensive basically to go say, oh, you clearly wrote this with AI. These aren't your genuine thoughts. I think journals and editors need to come up with policies like responses to these kind of concerns. So far, we've been very loath to reach out to reviewers and accuse them of anything because we don't want to falsely accuse them of using AI. And the few times where it seems that they probably have it most likely it was a reviewer translating situation where you can tell that the review was written by them, but maybe there was a few weirdnesses in the translation. But so we have excuse me. So we rarely go back to reviewers with those concerns, but we really focus on instead, what is the quality of the review? Are they making up stuff, or is it these are legitimate concerns that the reviewer has pointed out? And then we focus on that. And we do, going back to the question about whether the reviewers have used AI or not, we do kind of remind them throughout the process that they're not supposed to. And if they do, they need to disclose it. So we try to make it clear to them as much as possible, because as we mentioned, reviewers are overworked. And so they're not going to remember every journal policy. So we have to remind them of these policies every single time.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing the practical ground realities. I really see that this round of question that we have, the discussion, it really shows that the spectrum from resource limited publishers to a little bit of high stakes science, and the common thread I see is policy and practice when it comes to using AI in peer review, and how we evolve together if peer review is going to keep its credibility. Because generating a lot of stuff, where to use, how to use, in what ways to use, what not to use, but how exactly are we going to measure that, how this all of instruction is in practice, in implementation by all of the stakeholders, including publishers, the editors, the reviewers. So moving towards our final thoughts section, I would like to request all of the panelists to leave us with one key message with your experience as editor and editor-in-chief, and maybe a part of your side as reviewer, on how to rethink editorial gatekeeping in the AI era. Laura, I want to start with you.
Thanks, Maryam. Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about sort of one message to sort of sum up what we've been talking about, I think what sticks out for me is that a lot of the experimentation that we've been doing with using AI has shown really that it works best as an assistant, but not as a replacement for human peer reviewers. And I think even perhaps as an assistant at the editorial office phase before it even reaches human peer reviewers, we were saying. Alaina was saying about sort of the burnout that we're experiencing. So I think editors should think about how best to embrace the potential benefits of AI, but always without losing that human in the loop, because that's where the sort of the real credible insight comes from.
Perfect. Jumping to Alaina, how do you see it concluding into punchline or something?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll just echo what I said at the top of the hour, that you cannot say no, full stop. Um, Whether you like it or not, part of being an editor now is keeping on top of AI usage trends, both positive and negative, and working to incorporate these in useful ways to try and prevent bad actors who would use AI to plagiarize, write false research, etc. I think that Jonathan's point is so important too, and I was hoping it would come up, the difference between open AI and closed AI. Because closed AI is created usually by a specific company or entity. No one outside of that company or entity has access to it. Open AI is your ChatGPT, your Gemini, things like that. And there's very little oversight with those. And they flat out say that anything you feed into that, it is using to build up its knowledge base. So anything you feed into an open AI system, it's using to then create more content. So from a scientific perspective, like, why would we want to feed unpublished, unpeer-reviewed research into OpenAI? It's just going to create more problems. And I have heard of a lot of journals lately creating a position almost like AI editor, kind of like we have scientific advisors and statistical reviewers. They are starting to create a position called AI editor, and it is that person's job not only to help them determine whether AI is being used appropriately, but also to stay on top of the trends and things within AI so that they can advise the journal and how to meet these things going forward. So, I mean, I think what I'll end by saying is just, stay vigilant and stay informed, because this is just part of the job now.
Perfect. Moving to Jonathan.
Yeah, so I think as a takeaway that I think there's a real opportunity here with AI. I think that, peer review tends to be this black box catch-all. It's like, you submit your article, it gets handled by editors, it gets sent to the peer reviewers, and it comes back. And we don't really know what's happening, especially during that peer review process. Like, what are the reviewers checking? Like, does everybody know what they're supposed to be doing? And I think we can really, since AI can do some of these, especially more technical checks, reference problems, things like that at a more systematic level, we really have the opportunity to break down peer review into its components and then focus with reviewers on what they do best, which is kind of providing their human perspective, their expertise, their experience, and bringing that to the review process and really focusing reviewers on that. So I really think going forward, it's good to think about AI as this opportunity about kind of making peer review, kind of focusing peer review on what is the really good part of it and making everything else more of like a technical check.
Perfect, Jonathan. And I would say we are all very much on time for the panel discussion. So I want to take a few on-air questions. I see a question from Dikran. Dikran, are you around and would you like to raise the question on your here? Or if anyone from the attendees would like to raise question or ask something for, yes, Dikran here.
Hi there, Maryam. Thank you so much for this panel. So insightful. I had a quick question. The de facto standard for AI seems to be becoming the EU AI Act. A lot of stuff is being set in stone in the EU, and the American side is more, I've heard, making an omelette by breaking lots of eggs. So let's organize. I was wondering if the journals are going to stratify the risk level because not everything in AI is risky. If a reviewer has just used logistics and AI, just give him a pass, but if he's done the whole review, maybe not. So this the risk.
All right,
I don't mind starting. Hi, Dikran. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned when I started talking that one of the first things I noticed was I started to get questions as an editor about how more so on the author side, but how they should disclose and what things should they disclose. And my sort of default at the beginning was really, well, just tell me everything. Tell me everything you've done with AI, and then we can work out how best to disclose that within the manuscript. But I think there is, as you say, there's going to be levels of usage, and again, I'm thinking possibly more from the author, the researcher perspective, but whether AI tools have been used in a systematic literature review or to do sort of any sort of analysis of data is a different thing to whether you've used it to polish the language or, do a translation or, almost like, a very advanced spell checker. Does that need to be disclosed? How risky is that? And again, I think this is from the author's perspective rather than peer reviewer, so it's a slightly different issue. But yeah, I think there is definitely levels and levels of risk. But I think with peer reviews in particular, it does come down to that privacy issue with making use of tools in an open environment is very different to using it in an enclosed system. So I don't know. My colleagues have any other thoughts on that?
Well, I will jump in. I will say that actually just yesterday we published an article in Eon talking about AI and peer review. And I'm not as familiar with the EU policy. I'm sorry, it's very typical American of me. Apologies. But we one of the things that's in that article is a template that the Authors Journal uses for asking authors to disclose AI use. And I don't see why something like that could not be adopted for reviewers as well. Maybe there's a set list of questions they have to answer when they submit their review. But basically, it says something along. I'm going to put the link in the chat in just a second. But it says something along the line of this AI tool was used specifically to do this. And then the authors acknowledge that all other parts of the research were completed by humans. Essentially, it's more elegant than that, I promise. But I was like, oh, that's great. Because, like people love a template. It makes things so much easier. It's why you standardize your author contributions and things like that. So I'm absolutely planning on taking that back to my journals and being like, this is something that we should develop that works for us. So I'll put that link in the chat.
Perfect. Moving to the next on your question, Lahore, what you would like to ask the panelists. Keep it short so that the
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much to all the panelists. I have two short questions. The first one is about manuscripts that have AI assistance. Actually, we have AI detectors that can identify manuscripts that have AI assistance. But as far as I know, there's a cost that helps writers or researchers to use AI, not to be detected by AI detectors at all. So in such a case, how can you make sure the paper is original or AI assisted? And another question is about pro and con on using AI for scholarly publishing. I have heard that some journals accept AI, but some journals may not. So what is your stance on AI usage? Thank you.
I can start with that. For the American Heart Association journals, we don't forbid AI use, but it does have to be disclosed, and you have to explain very clearly how you used it and what tools you used. My personal thinking is that, most research articles are reporting on research. So the article itself isn't necessarily the end product, in a sense. The research data is. So if there's a way that if the research data is fine and you've used AI to help kind of write the article around it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's definitely, there's a range, of course, there's a range of opinion on that, but I've talked to some very, profile editors at bigger journals who feel the same way, that's the data, research data itself, the results, the images, that's the important part. And if we can prove that those haven't been manipulated or affected by AI in any way, the writing of it can definitely use tools, for that. So I think it's hard to know in advance right now because not everybody is super clear about how they feel about that. But I do think that disclosing it up front is better than having it found out later, because that's when if there's some point it's discovered that you used AI and it wasn't disclosed, that's when editors start to get suspicious that something else is deeper going on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pick one question from chat, a little bit interesting. Is anyone attempting to blacklist reviewers who abuse AI and or reward very good reviewers? How do you see it?
I don't think we've come to that point yet.
Yeah.
No
I
one's
don't feel we have.
no one's been blacklisted. We do within our manuscript tracking system, we have reviewer rankings, but those are not public to anyone except
Yeah.
for the editors. As far as rewarding them, we do usually around peer review week because it's, why not? It's symbolic. We do pull a list of our top reviewers and we send them an email, obviously saying thank you, we appreciate your time. But we also give them a little social media badge that they can put on LinkedIn or whatever, saying I'm a top reviewer for the ASCPT journal family. Other than that, though, not really. I know that's a big discussion across the industry right now. Like, how and if you do reward reviewers, I mean, my personal thought is if you're an author, you should be a reviewer. If you've written research, you should be reviewing research. And I don't know that I necessarily think we should be paying for reviews, but I also know that's a very, very divisive topic at the moment. So I'll turn it over to someone else.
All right. So
I mean, I think I would just echo that. I don't think we're at the point where we've blacklisted. Well, I certainly haven't blacklisted anybody. And I think it was Jonathan you mentioned earlier. It is quite difficult to make that accusation sometimes. Of you might suspect possibly the involvement of AI with a reviewer that hasn't been disclosed, but you don't want to sort of break down those relationships. And if it's a language issue or whatever else. So yeah, I don't think we're at that point yet, certainly, and hopefully we won't. End up with great long lists of people that are blacklisted, because really we want to work together and build those relationships with reviewers, not break them down.
Right. I want to pick one more thing about the policies of using AI in the peer review process or the writing process, how the journals, from your three of your opinions or perspective, that how the journals are integrating it and how the response is from the audience.
How we're integrating AI in the peer review process for our journals. I can say from so we're not yet. We're looking into doing it, but we don't currently have anything available to reviewers right now. The tools are new, and I think as was mentioned, they're kind of expensive even for a larger publisher. And so we're taking our time. We're surveying the field and kind of seeing what we can do to make this available to reviewers, but we don't currently have any tools.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Same for us. Our policy at the moment is that peer reviewers can't upload papers into any AI system that is publicly available, which essentially means, for most of them, it means they can't use it at all. I mean, if they were to, I guess, write their review off and use it to sort of, polish language or something without actually involving the paper itself, if they'd written their review and they wanted to put that into the system, then there's nothing stopping the use of that. But I would ask that would be disclosed within the review process. But we're not at the moment at the stage of integrating. There's lots of interesting looking tools out there that I'd be interested to see more of, but at the moment that's not something that we are personally using.
Mm-hmm. I think and it may be the same for a lot of smaller societies, we're kind of at the mercy of our publishers in terms of what we can offer our publishers and our manuscript tracking systems. There are lots of ideas that'd be fun to try, to pilot, to implement, but we just don't, as a small society, we don't have the infrastructure to do that. There was actually that we had an editorial board, not just the team, but the board meeting for one of our journals yesterday. And what was supposed to be like a quick discussion about AI and peer review actually turned into, I mean, these are polite people. It wasn't really heated, but it was the most contentious editorial board meeting I've ever been on. It's usually very much like, okay, everyone's doing a great job. Thanks for your work, and we're done. And this was, our publisher's representative was there, and he was saying, we're working on it. And one of the editors was like, well, but it's available. And he's like, I think she was misunderstanding that he didn't know the difference between closed AI and open AI. But it really like brought up a lot of feelings, and we found out that one of our best reviewers is actually uploading pieces of the paper into AI to like check the stats and stuff. And we were like, okay, he's a really good reviewer, but if he thinks that's okay, obviously our policies are not clear enough. And so we're kind of going back to the drawing board on, how do we get this information to them? And then how do we get a reliable way to at least somewhat determine if our policies are being followed?
All right, thank you, Alaina. And I want to wrap up for today's panel discussion. Thanks again to three of the panelists, Laura, Alaina, and Jonathan, for such a thoughtful discussion and engaging interactive session for today. And thanks to all of the attendees who are joining us live today. What stood out today for the panel discussion covering editor-in-chief's perspective is that artificial intelligence is not just a new tool to market when it comes to our editorial policy and editorial work. It's just a new test for editorial leadership, I guess. So editors, they will be the one deciding what changes, what stays, and how exactly this peer review can continue to earn trust in the global community and in a faster changing landscape with AI. So on behalf of the Asian Council of Science Editor, thank you for being part of this discussion. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts and continuing the dialogue throughout the peer review week. So before we say the final goodbyes, if anyone who is comfortable, please put on your camera so that we can have maximum of joining attendees with us on screen. It's not mandatory, it's up to you. If you are comfortable, please put the cameras on. All right, we have like 4 to 5 screens, so just stay with me. Just put on the cameras if you feel comfortable. Just 2 more screens to go. All right. Going back. So thanks to the panelists and all of the attendees for joining us today. And I'm very much looking forward to a few of the faces from today to our tomorrow's panel discussion that is like a global perspective. Thank you once again on behalf of the Asian Council of Science Editors. We will be seeing you in our other events online, in person, and stay healthy. Goodbye till the next event. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Miriam.
Bye bye.
Thank you
Bye
all.
bye. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye. God
Bye.
bless you.